Okay, so like I said last week, this week I want to talk about something that came up at the conference I was at, because it is something that this absolute fucking worn out saddlebag of a human decided to make a fucking problem. And for that, we're going to talk about food additives and GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. And there are a couple of things you want to know about this, but these are things that are in the law. So a lot of the time, people will say that saying something is GRAS, or GRAS, generally recognized as safe, is a loophole in the law. But it's not. It's actually in the law. So there was the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and to a lesser extent, the Food Safety Modernization Act. Now, the first thing that is really one of those big ones that you hear a lot, but that is not necessarily true, is that people will say, well, you got a bunch of food colorings that are just sort of allowed into things, and that's the Wild West. And I hate to break it to you, but that's not true. Actually, food colorings are regulated more strictly than most other food additives. And one thing that's important to note is that there is no food coloring that is GRAS. As you can see here on the FDA's website, colors can't beat GRAS. Food coloring cannot beat GRAS. All of them actually have to undergo and have rigorous testing for safety and performance. Now, something even more interesting is that a lot of food colorings are actually certified by the FDA. And that's because they may have, if produced improperly or if not manufactured in the right way, may be dangerous. But all of these FDA certified food color additives are certified for each single batch made. And because of that, these are actually some of the most rigorously tested food additives that we have. FDA has to release and test each batch. So right off the bat, that is food colorings. Now, we're going to talk about something called CFR, or the Code of Federal Regulations, specifically because that's where a lot of federal rulemaking comes in. So one thing you should understand about the regulatory environment around a lot of things in this country is that it's not necessarily directly spelled out in the law. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? I don't want some geriatric 72-year-old motherfucker trying to regulate a thing they don't understand. You want scientists to be the ones helping to draft legislation about things that require scientific evidence. Because of this, a lot of laws that are written apply these frameworks that are then utilized by regulatory agencies. And all of these rules and regulations are published in the Code of Federal Regulations, and that's when they become binding. So we're going to look at the CFR. We're going to start particularly in Part 170. And Part 170 is about food additives. Now, a food additive is any and all substances that are intended to or may reasonably end up in food. And this can happen because of things like preservatives, right? A preservative is a food additive. Now, food additives aren't necessarily the food itself, but they are components of it. So naturally occurring things, for instance, a banana is a food. If you were to take a banana, put it in some sort of squeezable container, and then add a preservative, that preservative is a food additive. The banana would be the food. So we have a lot of ways to regulate food additives. And it's important to know that generally speaking, we are looking at things that have a lot of scientific backing around their safety and use cases. And something really important to note is that you can use an ingredient for multiple different purposes as a food additive. For each purpose of the thing, it has to be evaluated. So generally speaking, when you were talking about safety for food additives, this has to come as a result of published and publicly available scientific data. And at any point, a challenge can be brought against a food additive to say it is not safe. And then the wealth of scientific data, along with the letter petitioning or challenging the approval of that food additive, are taken into account, and that scientific data is analyzed to understand whether or not the thing is safe. Now, you will hear often about things that are banned in Europe but not in the US, and that's because of a different regulatory framework. So in the US, it is based on the overwhelming wealth of scientific information that something is safe. And you have Europe, which does a little bit more of a risk-averse approach to this. And so you can have things that have a very, very small risk if used improperly that would be okay in the US, but the European Union might not like. So there are differences there. And what's important to note is that all of this sort of food safety consideration is done as part of this regulatory framework. So food safety is actually something that is taken extremely seriously in this country, and it is something where any food additive is evaluated for safety based on its use. So if you're using something as a preservative or as an emulsifier, and it's the same thing, it has to get evaluated for both uses. So you can't just say, well, it was good one time, so it's going to be good this next time, because you might use it in different contexts. So it matters about whether or not you're intending to say, if this is a thing you can eat one of versus a thing you can eat 50 of, and what's the amount in each of these that this thing will show up. So if I'm going to eat one muffin, and that muffin has 20 chocolate chips, and there's something in that chocolate chips that's a food additive, then the limit of how much of that food additive can be there is different than, say, if there was a bag of chocolate candy that I could eat a whole lot of. Then the additive, that same additive from one to the other, would have different tolerance limits. And if I was using it for a different thing in those two, then it would still have a different safety check. So now let's talk about GRAS, or again, generally recognized as safe. The first thing right off the bat, food colors cannot be GRAS. So you can have something that is as part of a product used for some benefit, say a nutritional additive, like beta carotene. And if you use that for a nutritional benefit, it can be GRAS. But if you use it as color, it can't. Now, something important to note is that there's actually a standard for GRAS. So people think this just means that it's the wild fucking West. And people are wrong about that. So read this together. So general recognition of safety may be based only on the views of experts qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate the safety of substances directly or indirectly added to food. And the basis of their views may be either scientific procedures, or in cases of substances used in food prior to January 1st, 1958, through experience based on common use in food. And general recognition of safety requires common knowledge throughout the scientific community who is knowledgeable about the safety of substances directly or indirectly added to food, and that there's a reasonable certainty that the substance is not harmful. So what this means is that for something to be recognized as safe, there has to be publicly available or publicly published data about the safety of this thing. It has to be scientifically backed, or it has to have been a thing that has been in use for so long before 1958. And even those things that are GRAS from that period prior to the act, even those things can be challenged on the basis of their safety. And then they have to go through a review process. So it's not like something got grandfathered in and never gets looked at again. As a matter of fact, what the FDA started doing after this act was initiated, what they started doing was they actually started verifying GRAS data for things that had been categorized as GRAS. So they actually looked through the scientific data and they verified all of that. There's a whole appendix of things that are verified GRAS. But what happened was that at a certain point, sometime in, the 80s, I mean, might have been someone in the White House around that time who sort of, fucking sucked. What happened was that people didn't want to fund the FDA as much, and they wanted to shift most of its regulatory power to the drugs, so food sort of gets lagged behind. And what they didn't want to pay for was the government to do these analyses. So the government had to stop doing that. Now, here's the interesting part. Say that you're a company that has a product you believe is GRAS. You've got an additive that you've got a bunch of data says, nah, it thinks good. Do you just put that in your food? Sort of. So, at any point, the FDA can look at any production facility, and if you're using something that is not on the GRAS directory, but that you have regarded as GRAS, they can say, hey, we need to see every bit of scientific evidence and documentation you have, and it is your responsibility to produce that documentation at that moment. Now, this may seem like the Wild West, but again, we have prevented the government from actually doing this in advance. We've stopped the funding that would have allowed it. And so what happens instead is that this is a thing that gets done as needed. But it is always the responsibility of those organizations to have that data available. Now, lots of that data is publicly available, but it is the responsibility of the organization to have that all in one place on their end so that they can say, yeah, this thing is safe. Interestingly, there are parts of the CFR, Chapter 21, Title 21, Chapter 1, Subchapter B. There are parts of it where a bunch of these things that have been certified as GRAS and are listed as GRAS publicly are listed. So there's Chapter 182, Part 184 and 186. They have a bunch of substances that are listed there. But it's not everything, right? Because if you listed every single food additive and you're going to say, oh, we don't want any additives in our food. Yes, you do. You don't know that, but you do, right? Preservatives are food additives. Now, sometimes you can do things by tweaking the pH or the water activity or the salt content of your product to sort of give it more shelf life. But a lot of things need more than that, right? Water activity is basically how dry something is. Bacteria does not like to grow in dry things because it can't. And because it can't, dry things tend to be things that last longer. So that's why you've got things like jerky, right? That's why you've got hardtack or biscuits. All of these things that they used to make that lasted a long time did so because they were so goddamn dry. That's why you salted all your beef. You up the salt, you decrease the moisture, and that makes it damn near impossible for bacteria to grow. Now, obviously, there are things you can't do this for. You can't make a soup dry. I mean, you can, they have powdered soup, you add water, but no one's got fucking time for that. So you can rely on process. Things like canning can help to decrease that bacterial load. Things like pasteurization, ultra high temperature processing can do that. But there are just times you need preservatives and things. There are times you need things to provide a texture or a flavor or a color that you just sort of want in food. And I know there are a lot of people who disagree with that general idea. And I will preface this by saying, listen, I might have concerns about some food additives. I might not. I might think that food could be a little bit simpler, but I do think when you're trying to feed all 7 billion and change of us that there are on the earth, that having additives to keep your food stable for longer is extremely important so people don't go hungry. And still, the idea that foods have all these extra additives, a lot of that is due to consumers because we demand certain things out of our food. They need to be extremely palatable. They have to taste good. They have to have good mouthfeel. They have to have a good smell. All of this has to be there. They have to last a long time. They can't look weird because we all know that you'll be sitting there looking at a food that might taste good, but if it looks like shit, you're not going to eat it. And the problem is these companies have to sell their food. Now, additives, things like fillers, they make food cheaper so that people can purchase more food. Again, it's a logistics game. We all don't live down the road from a farm. And even if we did, the cost there can be prohibitive. And again, it's the system we've set up. And if you want to change that, that's fine. I could argue and agree that we should, but I don't think it should be at the expense of, feeding more people on the planet. At the same time, when you're talking about highly processed foods, the definition of highly processed is actually something very specific in food science. And so people hear highly processed, and there's a lot of stuff that you would not think is highly processed, but that is. And I've put a list up here. And that's surprising that these things are highly processed, but that term means something. Now, I think the idea that our food is just woefully unsafe is incorrect. I think the large thing is that we as a country, and I will not be blameless in this, consume far too much of the food that we have. And I think that it's more likely that component than anything else. Because again, all of these recommendations on food safety are based on recommended amounts of the food that you should have. Now, how many of you, like me, have looked at a package of a food, looked at the recommended amount of that food, or the recommended serving size, and then went, yeah, I'm not going to eat like 3 Pringles, fuck off. But the problem is, those things actually fucking mean something. And it's difficult for us to deal with that situation. But it's important to know that food additives generally are safe. They've got a history of scientific backing behind their safety. And if they are something that got grandfathered into GRAS, there's a decent chance that it's actually been verified since that point. At the same time, companies face huge legal ramifications if they put something in their food that they call GRAS, so they get it through that, so they go through that method of approval, where they just have to have all their data at any point. But should that thing not be safe, it will absolutely demolish a company. And that's the system we set up. And if you want to change it, it's fine. But to lie and say that this is a system that was set up by big food is just incorrect. It's a system that was set up by small government. And so you can make all the arguments you want about the fact that this is lobbyists and this is fucking political will, and it is political will. It's the political will of people who want the government to be smaller. If you want to know every single component of every single food is perfectly safe at all points, and you want a bunch of data about that every single day, that costs money. You do understand that that costs money. And at present, we've offloaded that requirement for things that are GRAS to the companies putting those things in. We have a bunch of stuff that doesn't fall into this regulatory, and then there's required stuff that the FDA sees, that it orders, that gets given to the FDA. But for things outside of that purview, we've decided that we want our tax burden low enough that we don't give a fuck about having that data. And so we can't be pissy when we don't have it, if we're not willing to do something to change that situation. And all of this is to say that it's complicated out there, right? There's just a mountain of shit that you have to sift through to try and understand this. And it's not easy. And so you get this beaten up wallet talking to you about how he thinks shit works, and it sounds stupid because it fucking is. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer. He's not a scientist. He doesn't fucking understand science. And if you listen to him for 20 minutes, it's fucking apparent that he, much like ChatGPT that he uses to write his reports, just puts together words that sound right. It doesn't actually do any of the fucking work to understand it. Man was sitting there rambling about a universal flu vaccine when he meant a vaccine platform that wouldn't even be universal. He's just a fucking idiot. But he's a fucking idiot that people trust because I guess he's, coked out of his mind on HGH? And people act like, oh, I mean, look how fit RFK is. He must be doing something right. Yeah, he's being fucking rich. He's coming from a wealthy family. He has no real responsibilities in this world. Never has. Of course he's doing well. He's got access to whatever sort of HGH or steroids or testosterone he wants. So that's science he agrees with. And he's got all the fucking money and time in the world to do with that what he pleases. It's the same reason that you've got actors and actresses who are just buff as fuck. Because they've got the time and the money. It's not because he made the right choices. I mean, God, man fucking cut off a whale head and chained it to the top of his fucking car. Man wanted to eat a bear he hit with his car. Like, this guy has not found an animal he wouldn't shove down his throat. This man doesn't make good choices. This man got a bunch of people in Samoa killed because he fucked around about vaccines. And the entire point is, we have a system that has checks and balances and safeguards that tries to keep people and their food safe. We have this. For now. But who's to say what comes later? And I will also point to some additional food additives that you probably haven't considered, but I do think are pretty important. So vitamins. Added vitamins are a food additive. So it takes a food that is not as healthy, adds a little bit something to it to make it healthy. That's what a food additive can do. You can't look at them as a blanket of bad things because they're not. And I don't know, maybe I'm just ranting at this point, but like seriously, there has to at some point be some respect for experts in this country, in this world. Expertise is not a thing you get by fucking pulling up Grok or ChatGPT. It is a thing you get by continued study. It is a thing you get by immersing yourself into a thing and by dedicating yourself to it. Listen, when my fucking car breaks down, I don't take it to a veterinarian to fix. But a more apt example, when my car breaks down, I don't find a random person in a Walmart parking lot and have them fix my car. Because that's what RFK is. He's that random fucker in that Walmart parking lot who I'm going to ask to fix my car. This motherfucker has driven a car, and that's it. And when his bullshit rhetoric incites things like people shooting at the fucking CDC, killing a police officer outside the CDC, and shooting up a bunch of windows because this person thinks that the COVID vaccine made them depressed. Even though, when you think about it, how many millions, how many billions of people got COVID vaccines? You think with a sample size in the billions, it wouldn't be apparent if there was something funky going on there? Of fucking course it would be. You couldn't hide it. And so this whole idea, this whole conspiratorial, everyone's out to get you, everyone wants to fuck you thinking, this asshole and his friends have pivoted to, all of this is a fucking problem. And we got a lot of problems right now. So it's hard to prioritize. But let me tell you, this absolute fucking monstrosity of a human is going to do incalculable damage if he is not stopped sooner rather than later, if he does not resign his position or get removed by someone having a clear day once. Now, my only hope, the deepest hope I can have in regards to RFK Jr. being removed from his position, is that at some point, God willing, he finds a problem with the fillet of fish. Because if he can fucking find a problem with the fillet of fish and start talking shit, Trump will kick him out faster than Scaramucci. Because there's nothing Trump loves more than a fillet of fish, except for himself and money and Jeffrey Epstein, probably. So, yeah. I mean, fuck that guy. Fuck all those guys. Fuck every person I just mentioned in that previous sentence. That being said, this is, I think, the end of the video. As always, links are in the description. As always, I want you to take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And I will hopefully see you next week Next week is first Candela game I'm running for my group, so we'll see what happens. I got a lot of work to do. Anyway, take care. Thank you.